My name is Brandon. I'm a former police sergeant and assistant SWAT team leader. Today, my mission continues with a remarkable organization called Here Tomorrow, whose mission is the removal of all barriers to mental health support in order to save lives. Welcome to our podcast, Clearing the Minefield. The men and women in uniform who will be our guests have made extraordinary sacrifices in service to their people. Now, with strength and resilience, they live their lives on the road to wellness. We ask you to understand that some of the raw and real experiences they'll be sharing may be unsettling to some viewers. Now walk with me, friend, as we clear the minefield. Welcome back to Clearing the Minefield. I'm your host, Brandon Hicks. We have an incredible guest this morning, Nick Padlo, founder of Sophros Recovery. Before we get to Nick, I want to give a quick shout out to Sweeney Plumbing and Remodeling. So I've known these guys forever. So I first met Russ and Steph when they were 15, 16 years old as police explorers. We were training in the martial arts. I coached Russell through all of his MMA fights. Today, they've got a beautiful family and a thriving business. Sweeney Plumbing and Remodeling is built on the ideals of faith, values, and family. Whether you've got a big job or you're building a strip mall, they can handle it for you. Check out Sweeney Plumbing and Remodeling. Good morning, Nick, and welcome.
Morning. Good to be here.
I'm glad you were able to make it. We've done quite a bit of work together. I think we've heard each other's stories. Really excited for everybody to learn from your experience here.
Yeah, excited to do it.
Great. We'll jump right in, buddy. Can you tell us a little bit about where you're from, where you grew up?
Yeah, so I grew up here in Jacksonville, went to high school here, and then I left in 99 to go to West Point for college, and then kind of was all over the place, and then made my way back about 20 years later.
Outstanding. Jacksonville native, man. I don't think I run into many Jacksonville natives, so it seems like everybody's coming from the outside.
Absolutely. Few and far between. I almost left, but it pulled me back, so.
It'll do that. Yeah, I thought I was going to leave at one point, but it was a little too cool for me to go. To go back. So you went to Wolfson High School? Do I remember that right?
I did. Yeah, I went to Wolfson. Yeah.
I went to Mandarin High School the year it opened. Imagine that.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I'm getting up there, man. What was high school like for you?
High school was good. I always tell people kind of when I tell my story, when I was 8 years old, my dad had this quote on the wall, and it said, "Winning isn't everything. It's the only thing. You don't do things right once in a while. You do them right all the time. There is no second place. There's only first place." And so throughout high school, that was kind of my mantra. And I always wanted to be the best at everything. So I was a happy kid. I excelled at sports. I did well in school. I was big into the church. So, I didn't believe in drinking underage. And I was kind of straight and narrow, trying to do all the things the best I could. So high school was really, really a good experience for me.
That's great. Yeah, you said, there is no second place, which gives me an opportunity to quote Ricky Bobby, "If you ain't first, you're last."
Yeah, that was the same quote 20 years later,
Outstanding, yeah. I'm with it. I dig it. So high school, is that the point where you were deciding what you wanted to do with your future and you thought military service is the way to go?
Yeah, no, it didn't actually go like that at all. So when you take the SATs, if you do pretty well, you get these little cards in the mail to try to apply to colleges.
Yeah.
And one of them was from West Point, and I had not no interest, but it wasn't something I was considering. But they were holding their reception at Crawdaddy's, and I don't know if you remember that restaurant.
I do, yeah.
But I loved that place, and we couldn't really afford it. So for me, I was like, "Oh, free food, I'm in." Yeah, that was the only reason I went.
Deal.
And I went there, and it was a bunch of JROTC kids mostly. And so everybody had these weird haircuts, and they were wearing these funny looking uniforms with all these fake ribbons on them. They weren't fake, but to me, they were fake. And I was like, "This is weird. I'm leaving." And so I started walking toward the door. And as I was walking toward the door, almost in like slow motion, they shut the door, turned the lights down, and put on this propaganda video. And by the end of that 3 minutes, I was going to West Point and I was committing to the Army. Yeah. So, and it was great. It was everything that I didn't know I was looking for. I loved academics. I loved sports, but I wasn't quite good enough to play baseball at Division I, maybe a small school somewhere, but I was, I wasn't going to go play in the majors. It was kind of clear at that point. Yeah. And so I was like, I still get to play sports, semi-competitively. I still get to I get to learn how to box. I get to, it's a good school and it's free. And I'm like, this is everything I'm looking for. And I also loved that they focused on the honor code. Cadet will not lie, cheat, steal, or tolerate those who do. And so you had this ethics component to it. And so all those things just really resonated with me. And I say propaganda video, teasingly, but the reality is it was everything I was looking for, and I
Sure.
just didn't know that.
Yeah, that's fair. You know, the old Marine Corps commercials. You remember those? Killing the
Oh
Dragon.
yeah,
Man, those things got so many people. Great commercials. So West Point bribes you with food.
absolutely.
All right. So what's that like going into it? Because that's not just a school, man. I mean, that's an American institution. That's legendary. What was it like going into that kind of a thing?
Pretty intimidating. I always tell people, military people kind of get this. It's not surprising to them, but for anybody that's a civilian that's learning, I always describe my college experiences. You're not allowed to speak outside your dorm room your freshman year unless spoken to by an upperclassman, in which case you have 4 responses. Yes, sir. No, sir. No excuse, sir. Sir, I do not understand. So my freshman year, a lot of my friends, freshman year of college, they're joining a fraternity and doing whatever you do in fraternities, and I'm not allowed to speak outside my room for a year.
Wow.
It's just a much different experience. And so it's just
Yeah,
this
indeed.
high discipline, high stress, kind of simulate what combat is like, let you learn that, at least as much as they can. So it was tough freshman year, but, with anything, I think, as you get up in the years at West Point, you get these responsibilities. Sophomore year, you're in charge of 2 people. Junior year, you're in charge of whatever, a squad. Senior year, I was in charge of the honor code, which is why I came there in the first place. And so you have this kind of increasing level of responsibility that I don't think a lot of college kids necessarily get to have. And, meanwhile, you're balancing 20 credit hours and intramurals and all this other stuff. So it was a tough experience. People always say it's not a great place to be, but it's a great place to be from,
Okay.
which I think is fair.
Yeah, that's interesting. So I think so many people have a very different college experience. It's a party school, or it's this thing or that thing. That doesn't sound like West Point.
I remember when I was at West Point, one of the magazines, I don't know if it was Sports Illustrated or whatever it was, they always released the top 10 party schools in the country. And then kind of as a joke, they do the bottom 10 party schools.
Okay.
And so, along with 3 or 4 other kind of religious institutions like BYU, for example, is
Mhm.
always on there. West Point's always top 3. So
Fair.
we were, or bottom 3, as the case may be.
There you go. So with that, how was academic study there? Was it different from what you would experience before, more regimented?
It was so much more regimented. I mean, in high school, I always took one day off. We were talking about photography earlier. I always took one day off of school every week to just stay in the dark room and do what I wanted. I was late to classes all the time. I always made good grades because Wolfson, wasn't that challenging for me at the time. I think it's a magnet school now, but at the time it was, people were just getting by.
Sure.
And so I really blew off school, and I still did well, but I blew it off, and I made mostly A's and B's. But at West Point, the discipline was really good for me. And I really excelled academically there.
Outstanding.
In a way that I never did in high school. And it's supposed to be way harder, but for whatever reason, that environment was really good for me. And I think it was because you can't control a lot within that. You kind of feel like you're at the whims of everyone else in the system. But the one thing I could control was my study and my academics. And so that was really, maybe it was a coping mechanism or whatever, but I could control that. And so I wanted to do really well. And I did.
It's such a different experience, I think, than most American kids have when they go to college. You were obviously drawn in by the values, the honor code, the ethics. It sounds like you were drawn to that element of it, then that you took to that regimentation, that discipline really well. How did that shape your ideas of what it was going to be like when you actually went into service?
Well, I mean, when I went to West Point, I wasn't thinking war. It was 1999. And so, my thought was, well, I'll do some training, and, we haven't been at war since Vietnam, really.
Sure.
So I'll do some training. I'll, do my part and serve my country, and in a way that looks very differently than how it actually ended up looking.
That happens, doesn't it? Yeah.
Well, but you don't know that when you go in,
Sure.
So, in 2001, I was, I guess, a sophomore, junior, and, the 9/11 happened. And I remember everyone was, kind of like looking into classrooms because it was during the day or during the morning. And then kind of then class started. And so I just found an empty room, and I sat in this empty English classroom and watched like everything change. And it was scary, but I think at the same time, it also felt meaningful. 9/11 was a time where everyone really came together,
We did.
and I was like, I'm in a place to do my part. And so it felt good. Like and I felt like I was ready. And I think I was really well prepared for, the upcoming deployments that came later.
Understood. Yeah, I guess you were in good hands, developmentally.
Yeah.
So you graduate, you're ready to move on to service. What did that look like for you?
So I went to the military intelligence basic course out at Fort Huachuca. 6 months out there, 5 months, really just kind of getting ready, knowing that we're going to Afghanistan, as the case was for me first. And I think I was at my unit had already deployed like 3 weeks prior to me getting there. And so I think I was there for, a month maybe before we shipped down range. And I went down with 227 infantry, which is funny. I choose military intelligence so that I can kind of just be in a room somewhere, and then I ended up with the infantry battalion anyway. But
Yeah.
it was a great experience. Learned a lot. Got to be there for the first presidential elections in Afghanistan, or the first democratic ones, and it was really cool to see that.
I would imagine, to just kind of see that thing emerge. Not many of us will get that look. What it's like to watch a burgeoning democracy just kind of come up. How long were you in Afghanistan?
So I always get confused. I was in Afghanistan and Iraq for 15 months and 12 months, but I can't remember which one was which right now. I think it was 12 months in Afghanistan, 15 months in Iraq. They were both supposed to be 12 months, but the Army does what the Army does sometimes.
They do that, yeah. So it's, this is the plan, and we're not going to stick to it because we don't have to. Were the two tours very different for you? Were they distinctly different experiences?
They were very different. Afghanistan, I was with the infantry battalion. I was brand new second lieutenant, trying to figure out what things look like. Had a great battalion commander who's now the CEO of Wounded Warrior Project.
Oh, cool. Oh, I didn't know that. That's
yeah, cool. I thought as a lieutenant colonel, sorry, General Pyatt, I thought he was really old. But now it's like he was a young lieutenant colonel, ended up making, I think 3-star general, and now he's doing big things. But it was great to have that example of leadership right off the bat.
I bet.
But it was an infantry battalion, and it was hard work, and it was like kind of a grind. Whereas in Iraq, now I'm a captain. I was on a MIT team in Iraq, so I was embedded in the Iraqi army, and it was I was much less of a individual contributor, kind of executor, and more of, leading some change in how they do things in their army, which was really cool and exciting.
Oh man, I bet that was. That must have been just a really formative period. So, was it that they were going from ground zero? Was it that they already had some expertise in the Iraqi army? What did that look like?
I mean, they had been trained on some stuff. Like they had some tactical skills. The special forces guys had been over there and given them some training coming up. But I think as far as organizationally, they were still really slow. Really kind of behind. So we were able to take. We were really lucky. We kind of got this team task, and so I don't remember if it was Major Albert. He got promoted later too. I don't know where he finished, but or someone else on our team. But we basically handpicked all the officers and senior enlisted that we knew were really good from throughout the brigade. And so it was like all my best friends on the team.
Oh, that's
and we had a guy that was a supply guy. We had a guy that was an intel guy. We had a guy that was an infantry guy. And so we kind of each paired with the senior leadership of the Iraqi army up there, and really revamped how they did everything. I was obviously intel, so I was in charge of the interrogation facilities and all that stuff. And, going from a place where we bring people in and we torture them to, okay, now we're going to move to a place that does professional interrogations. We're going to get real information. We're going to combine that with other sources of intel, and we're going to have actionable things for our infantry guys to go after.
Okay.
And it was amazing to see that transformation, just in 15 months.
I bet it was. All that work, man, all that effort that goes into that is just extraordinary to be a part of, I'm sure. But not all sunshine and rainbows, right? What was the best thing about that deployment for you, and maybe what was the biggest struggle?
I think the best thing for me was getting to do it with people that I really trust and people that I really love. Still a lot of my best friends are from that team, and my team leader, commander, whatever you want to call him in that size unit, he actually lives here in Jacksonville now, so I get to see him regularly. But I think the best part was just the camaraderie. And even with the Iraqi army, like I loved those guys and getting to celebrate Ramadan with them and observe it and, even more than they did at times, but really trying to understand that culture and what drives them was an awesome experience. I think the hardest part for me was just being away from everything else. Being away from, I was stationed in Hawaii at the time, so there was a
Okay.
lot to miss. Um,
Yeah.
Being away from like relaxation and, we can talk about this as well, but I think also just being in that state of hypervigilance for so long is challenging. It's, the amygdala or whatever it is in your brain that's like kind of got to be on the whole time um, can be tough.
It is. It doesn't really have an off switch, does it? So it's it gets activated and it's on. So how do you turn it off? I guess is a big part of that question. So all of that experience, maybe at that time were you thinking, what am I going to do when I'm out? Were you planning on exiting? Were you planning on staying in for a career? What were
I
you?
was pretty done. I was in a relationship at the time and I wanted to have a family. We were between deployments. We were only home for 10 or 11 months and there wasn't an obvious end in sight. And so I was like, is this conducive for a family or what I want to have in my life? And I was like, it's time for me to move on. And I had a couple friends that had gone to business school, like basically gone back to school after they got out as kind of a reset and then also a rebranding for themselves to say, okay, now I have some skills and tools in a different area to go with this leadership. I'm not just an army guy that's trying to translate my leadership to something else, which makes a whole lot of sense, but it doesn't always translate to employers in the same
Doesn't.
way.
Yeah.
They don't understand it, but they can understand the schooling. And so that was kind of a shortcut for me or long cut, whatever you want to call it. But it was a way for me to be able to communicate my story in a way that I felt would resonate more with the civilian world.
That's such a big time, man. It's a shift. When we go from service back to normal life, whatever normal life is. So many of us, whether we're first responders or we're in the military, we struggle with identity. We struggle with, what's my purpose now? Because we had a purpose yesterday. You know, we
Yeah.
woke up and we were Sergeant Hicks. We were Captain Padlo, and today we're just Brandon. We're just Nick.
Yeah.
So, what was that transition like for you?
I think it was hard for me. I don't think it was hard for me. I went to business school. I got into business school out at Stanford, which was awesome. Such a blessing. And I'm with all these people that they're coming from Wall Street. They're coming from, major consulting firms. They're coming from industry. They all know what all this stuff is about. They're coming from wealthy families. I felt super inadequate.
Mm.
Here are all these intellectual kids that have been doing all of these impressive business things. And I'm like, I chase bad guys.
Right.
Like, I feel super
Yeah.
inadequate. And I think after a while, I started to learn that like they felt inadequate around me too. Right. They had everything, a lot of them had a lot handed to them. They got to go to private school growing up. They had somebody to pay for their Ivy League school. I didn't have any of those things. And so they looked at me and said, wow, like this kid really earned his spot.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at them and saying, wow, they're so impressive. I don't, so it goes both ways. I think that sense of inadequacy. But I think those of us that come from a non-traditional background, be it sports or be it the military or whatever route you get into business school from that's not business, um, I think we can sometimes feel like we don't fit in.
Oh, for sure.
And then
Yeah.
compound that on top of the, just the military specific stuff where it's like, there's 8 other guys in my class that have served out of 300, which is good. Thank God there were 8. But it's not a lot, you
It's
know?
not. So you're in this mix now. You've been doing this incredible work in Iraq and Afghanistan. As you said, it's quite different from what these other folks are doing. One of the things that can get really frustrating, I think, is questions from people who haven't served about your service. Did you find that to be uncomfortable? Were they pretty gracious about it? What was your experience there like?
I mean, all of these kids are super smart. And so I think their intellect, kept them asking appropriate questions.
Good.
And they're also conscious and, they don't want to say the wrong thing. So I think they soft pedaled a little bit and maybe didn't ask the questions they wanted to ask, which may be good.
Good. Yeah.
And at the same time, I realized that, within America, when you get to different class systems and people that have grown up in families that have more, and I mean, different levels, like New York, California more, not necessarily, Jacksonville, Florida more.
Sure.
They've never met anyone who served.
Wow. Okay.
My roommate told me I was the first person he had ever talked to that had ever served. And he was like 26, 27,
Okay.
and so it was a light bulb for me and it wasn't that he did have the curiosity. He did want to know. He did respect us. It just wasn't in his sphere. Whereas I think for you and me, God, we meet people all the time, right? And it's like, we think everybody meets people all the time, but there are pockets of America that they don't have that exposure. And so I think it's great for them. It's great for the school to have, 8 of us yahoos running around that can give exposure to what that is.
Sure. For so many of us, like the service goes back generations.
Right.
So to hear, I've never met anybody who served. It's like, not your dad, not your papa, not your
right. Yeah, exactly.
Like nobody. So, man, that's a big shift, isn't it? It's a big shift in gears. So you're in this civilian life now. You're going into new fields. You're going into business. You're going into different leadership fields. That's got to be exciting. There have to be some particular struggles to that. How was it acclimating to that, and did it produce any different struggles for you?
So the first thing I did was I became a consultant at Bain and Company, which is kind of a high-powered consulting firm, and it was a grind. 90-hour weeks, travel every week, and super high kind of intellectual acuity in terms of the work. So it wasn't like I wasn't thinking. It was 90 hours of really hard thinking all the time. And man, it was not for me. I don't mind thinking. I don't like working hard, but being a consultant just by nature of like, I'm helping someone else like with their thing, I felt like a mercenary, not like a soldier.
Okay.
It's not my business. I'm just there to help them for a little bit and then I leave. And so there was no sense of finality or accomplishment with regard to the projects that I was doing. It's like I go work for 6 months and I go somewhere else and I don't get to see it through. I don't get to have a piece of the ownership. And I don't mean financial ownership, but just like this is part of my, when I build something in a company that I'm working in, it's like I'm helping my company. Whereas here, it's like I'm helping someone else's company. I'm working harder than they are. I'm like, it's a lot of like thankless work, I guess, and they pay you well, right? And so that's the trade-off, but
Sure.
That trade-off isn't one that works for me. I need that sense of mission, that sense of value. And so that was not a fit. I learned a lot, but it was not a fit. And then I decided to start my own business or acquire a business. And I actually did that in pet cremation.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe you haven't heard that story yet.
I haven't.
So it was our job to make the worst day for a pet owner a little easier. It can be really hard when we lose a pet. And so we built this big company that was based around providing dignity to pets in death. And we had 8 locations across the U.S. It was thriving. But then I forget the guy's name, like the rest of the story.
Gosh, I used to love that.
Paul Harvey?
Paul Harvey.
Yeah.
That's the one. Yeah.
And that's when I really started to struggle. And we've talked about that. But that's when I started to struggle with alcohol. I started to struggle with drugs, and I started to struggle with depression and anxiety. And, I think a lot of it was probably a symptom of some of the things that we've already talked about, this loss of identity, this like figuring out who I am, a sense of inadequacy, potentially trauma or hypervigilance for a prolonged period of time in the military. And so, I started to really cope with alcohol and drugs, and then my mental health got worse, and then more alcohol and drugs. And so it was just a spiral downward. And so eventually I had to step away from that business. And then also the stress of being an entrepreneur. I think that's a real thing.
Yeah.
But now I can feel the stress and not decide to go drink on it, which turns out I perform better without drinking a bottle of vodka first. So
who would have thought that would be the case?
Yeah.
Right? Who would have thought that would be the case? And I think it's one of the things I've learned working here tomorrow about people who are struggling with suicidality is that when we lack purpose, that's a major driver of suicidality and those kinds of thoughts. And everybody, I think, generally needs a sense of purpose. But for a man like yourself, you've got a purpose. When you're in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then that's gone. So it sounds like you were really struggling to find some sort of meaning in that context.
Yeah. And, I always tell people, and this is something that I didn't do for so many years, is to, you can just go online and download values clarification worksheet, right? And you take this sheet and it's got 200 values, all of which are good, and you figure out which ones are your 5.
Nice.
And then if your job isn't aligned with that, if your relationship isn't aligned with that, you got to make some changes.
Okay.
And I never did any of that. And so here I was kind of floundering around, doing a job that I actually did love that business. But I don't know if it was aligned with my core values as a human or like what I really wanted to be when I grew up.
Sure.
And so you're doing something for 40, 60 plus hours a week that's not aligned with your mission. And in the other hours of the day, you're not really even sure what that mission is anymore. And so most of your time, you're actively not doing it. And then part of your time, you don't really know what it is. And so I did. I just felt lost. And I could escape that lost feeling with substances.
Yeah.
And so it worked as long as it did until it didn't.
It's a terrible feeling. When I misused drugs and alcohol, I had a bunch of surgeries via combat sports, and just getting banged up over the years in your career, and then I didn't typically rely on the pain medications after the surgery. Like I didn't feel like I needed them, so there are bottles of these things sitting around, right? And then you've got alcohol. So a lot of us misuse those substances as a way of kind of self-medicating, of medicating before we get to help.
Absolutely.
Is that what it was like?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a short-term fix to, a problem, and you feel better. I mean, if they didn't work, people wouldn't use them.
Right.
And I always use the example of for years I would, come home from a hard day at work and take the edge off with a drink or two. And what I didn't realize at the time, and what isn't portrayed in the movies, is like that's unhealthy drinking, even if it's 2, because it's the reason why. I'm using alcohol in this case to help make a bad feeling go away or to escape a negative emotion or feeling, which is fine when the emotions and feelings are this big. But, if 2 drinks gets rid of a negative emotion this big, then just do the math. When the emotion gets bigger, you just increase this. And then, unfortunately, then that cycle starts. Now it's like my emotions and feelings are bigger because I'm coming down and my cortisol is spiked from the alcohol, and there's a whole ton of neuroscience, but it just spirals down. It did for me. It does for a lot of people.
It does. It does for many of us. So you hear often, like in the recovery community, you have to hit rock bottom before you can change. I don't know that that's true, right? And rock bottom looks different for different people. But what was it like for you having that experience with self-medicating? What led to change for you?
Yeah, I did hit what I feel was pretty close to a rock bottom. But to your point, I don't think you have to. The AA always talks about how much easier it is if you do, and that's true. If you have a really low, the call for change is higher. Right? If if you have a bottom way down here, and you just sit around at 10 meters above the bottom, you can live there for a real long time, uncomfortably.
Quite.
So sometimes it's better if you hit bottom. For me, it was, a hotel room with a 9mm trying to decide if it was going to be my last day.
Yeah.
And so I was, I had a round in the chamber and pressure on the trigger. So it was, 2 pounds of pressure away from that being it. So pretty close to rock bottom. I guess rock bottom is really if I wasn't here anymore, but about as close as I could have gotten, I think. And, for whatever reason, I had the second thought that day to get on my phone and Google rehab. I didn't know what rehab was. I've seen them on TV.
Sure.
And if I'm being completely honest, I might have told you this before. I actually Googled luxury rehab from the ground, crying in a puddle of tears, in a dirty hotel room in Dallas. That's what I decided to Google. But I ended up getting lucky. I don't recommend anyone Google that. It's like the worst treatment centers in the country. But I just got lucky on Google and found a great place, and that kind of started my journey.
Okay. Was it instant for you? Did you go to rehab once and everything's better now?
Absolutely not. No.
Oh, no.
No. Yeah. Go figure. I thought that was the case. Just like everybody else, right? It's like, 30 days, I can fix this. I'm smart enough. I just need a little bit of a lift, and then I've got it. And so, against the advice of everyone at rehab, I did my 30 days. I was like the best student at rehab because that's how I operate. I'm like, I have to be the best at rehab, which again is probably some of my problematic thinking to start with.
Sure.
But I, did really enjoyed rehab. It's still my favorite place in the world. If I could go back without having to pay the cost of going back, I would absolutely go back there. So I get done. I go back to my same life, same lifestyle, same relationship. Everything that I was in before, I went back to. We always talk about changing the people, places, and things where we got sick. I changed 0 of them. And, didn't take long before I was back in that life again. And I was like, well, this time I'll do it smarter, and this time I'll do it less, and this time I didn't do any of that, right? It just, the brain doesn't work that way for me anyway. So, 9 months later, I got a all expenses paid trip by my insurance company back to the same rehab.
Okay.
Which again was great.
You liked it?
Loved it again. Right. Yeah, loved it again. I recommend anyone. And so the second time I did things differently. Instead of going to IOP, though, I had to do one last addictive behavior, which is 2 days before that, I decided I was going to go to Cambodia for 3 months and live at a temple practicing meditation and yoga full time.
Actually, that sounds awesome.
It was the best decision of my life. Yeah, super addictive in the way that I got to the decision. It was very impulsive. But I still work with my teacher from there every week. He's my mentor. He's my life coach. I'm going to go see him this summer. So I hope. And but it was the best decision of my life. It taught me, people always, I get so much pushback from military guys about meditation.
Yeah.
It's like, I can't think of nothing. And it's like, well, good, because that's the opposite of meditation.
That's not what you're supposed to
We're
do.
going to learn how to concentrate on something. You want to be able to concentrate on like the mission, right? Okay, well, today the mission is your breath. We're going to start real simple, because until you can do that, you're not going to be able to do the other things. And so I learned how to sit in the present moment and focus and be okay with it.
That's a trick, isn't it, for people like us?
Yeah, I mean, it's not one I've solved fully, but I'm darn sure better at it than I was in 2018, 2019.
Yeah, that kind of experience in recovery has been very useful for me as well. It's really helped me kind of be in the moment. It's easy to oversell that point, mindfulness, being in the moment, but that could be a trick, man. So it's
absolutely.
I had a similar experience there. So I know from us talking, it wasn't just one stint in rehab; it was multiple stints in rehab. There's this idea, you hear this all the time. Hurt people hurt people. We hear that all the time, and I think that's true, because, when we don't heal, we bleed all over people that didn't cut us. But also, one of the things that I knew I was going to click with you the first time I met you, because you did kind of what I did, man. We were hurt, we healed, and now we're going to be hurt people who heal people. What was that like, going from that position where I'm, man, all this pain, all this struggle, but now I'm ready to help other people heal? Tell me about that.
Yeah, I would say first I was ready to do it too soon. I think the first time in rehab, about halfway through, I wanted to run my business plan by my therapist, and he shut that down real quick.
Okay.
You need to focus on you right now. And so, in AA, it's the 12th step for a reason. Like, we've got some work to do first.
Right.
And so, I had to hit the pause button a couple times on myself. And I don't want to say thankfully, because it's probably the wrong word. When I got back the second time, it was COVID. And so that put a natural pause on my ability to kind of leap into helping other people.
Sure.
Because I could lose myself in that. I have a tendency to want to be the white knight, want to be the hero of the story, and self-sacrificing is something I'm really good at.
Sure.
To my own detriment. And so, I wanted to be able to help people. COVID put a little bit of the brakes on that. So I got to get a little bit of more solid ground and foundation built under me. But since then, I started Sophros Recovery. And so we're an addiction treatment center, as you know. What a blessing, though.
Oh, God.
Now in my recovery, and I did deal with relapse a couple times too. So that was a part of my story as well. But now during my recovery, I'm in a place where, yes, I need to focus on myself, and I get to do that, 12th step or whatever we want to call it, to work with other people. And it's not necessarily that step is, I kind of separate the two, in terms of the program and Sophros, but, getting to work with other people, getting to work with people that are healers, therapists, to see them do their work, be surrounded by that every day, surrounded by clients that I can pull and, give me credibility, because I'm one of them too. I'm a client, I'm not a client of this company, but I know what it's like to be a client.
Sure.
So, I think that's what helps keep me sober today, along with my own work. But it's the biggest blessing in the world. I mean, you think about, like you said, hurt people, hurt people. Yeah, I hurt people when I was in active addiction for sure. But I've helped a lot more people now than when I hurt.
So, Sophros recovery has just been a really cool find. It's actually how I got to here tomorrow. I'm a friend of Lane, met Amanda, our director of peer services, at a vendor show, and says that we're trying to start the suicide prevention program for military and first responders. We don't know anybody. She said, call this guy, right? So it's actually via Sophros that I got to where I'm at, and how the program got started at Here Tomorrow. It's been really cool. I'll say too, a lot of the people that we work with at Here Tomorrow, our focus is on suicide prevention, right?
Mm-hmm.
We don't do everything,
Right.
and people need help beyond what we can provide. And Sophros has been great for that. Also, on a personal level, I've sent people to Sophros that I love and care about. So not just on a professional business end. So guys, I wouldn't do that if I didn't trust these people and really believed in what they were doing and their motivation. So I want to thank you personally for having Sophros Recovery. And I want to thank you professionally for building such an incredible organization that can reach out and help people. I know you've gone through kind of some expansion recently with Breakthrough. Is that right?
Yeah, it's been wild. We started here in Jacksonville. We're fortunate to be able to open in Tampa. So we have a Tampa location, and then we just expanded to Breakthroughs, who's been around for 35 years. We acquired them from the owners because they were retiring. But it's an outpatient therapy practice. So it doesn't have to be addiction. We do families, we do couples, adolescents. But really what we wanted to be able to do, what we realized is that our core is providing solid addiction and mental health treatment, kind of both and separately. And so I feel like the expertise that we've developed in being a real leader in mental health treatment and like how do we start to get to the root of some of these things extends beyond addiction. It extends to depression, to anxiety, to people struggling with bipolar disorder, whatever it might be. Families, like, hey, I want to make my wife and I's relationship stronger. Like, I wanted to be able to do that. And so that was really the expansion there. And so now I feel like we're just a bigger part of the Jacksonville community. And, not everyone qualifies to be a client at Sophros, thank God.
Yeah,
I'm so happy for you if you don't. But everyone qualifies to go see a therapist.
Sure.
I see one. I just had an appointment 2 days ago.
Mm-hmm. I always see therapy a little bit like going to the gym. Go to the gym, work your mind out. You get a little sore. It's a little uncomfortable, but it's always an improvement.
And I always say, when people use that analogy, they're like, well, I don't need therapy. Like, everything's going pretty well. I'm like, do you only go to the gym when you have a sprained ankle? No.
Yeah.
You go to the gym to get your fitness better. Well, okay. Mental health fitness is just as important.
So cool. Nick, this has been an amazing conversation. I learned a few things I didn't know before. Letitia, my amazing producer, is telling me it's about time to wrap up. So we're going to do that. I would love to maybe have you back on in a future season to talk a bit more in depth about what you do clinically, and how that works. Again, man, just an amazing story. Cool learning a few things there. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, brother.
It's been a pleasure.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks, guys. Join us again for Clearing the Minefield. It could be a dangerous step out there walking through the mind, and we want to make sure that we put ourselves in the best position to do it. Stay safe, try to be good to each other, and remember, guys, if it's mentionable, it's manageable, so we got to talk about it. Thanks.